Hi friends, it's day 313. Today this is what I'm going to be talking about. The reason that we pay attention to Ukraine in the first place. That's where I'll start. I'm going to talk about drones. I'm going to talk about Russian drones. I'm going to talk about Ukrainian drones. I'm going to talk about drones being supplied. We'll talk all about that. Then we're going to talk about that missile strike from Ukraine to Russia and the confusing numbers. We'll talk about Ukraine's political relations with other countries and how they're expanding them. We'll have some fun with Russian state media, as we normally do, and we'll talk about who's learning Ukrainian and why. Okay, so I want to start here, and that is the reason that we're paying attention to this, because, it's one thing to think about, X number of people were killed here, X number there, or whatever, but when you really think about the human cost, this was up in my Twitter feed this morning, and I just thought, wow. So I'm going to read this to you. Meet 7-year-old Stas from the undefeated city of Bakhmut. Stas has been a kind of mascot for the soldiers. Stas has been waiting for Ukrainian soldiers to take his family to safety. It finally happened at Christmas. Stas is now safe and healthy somewhere in Ukraine. He shouldn't have to undergo this. Like, for whatever is going on geopolitically, he's an innocent victim, as is the country. Ukraine itself is an innocent victim, and understanding that Stas writ large is what's happening to Ukraine. That's why this is important. Real people are being really affected by what's going on. Okay, let's talk about our first major section, and that is about these drone strikes. So yesterday, or within the last day or two, Ukraine shot down 45 drones, according to the Air Force. This is from the Defense Post, and they did a really good job. They were having a hard time getting the missiles down the day before, but they did a good job here. One of the drones had "Happy New Year" written on it in Russian. We talked about that yesterday. Drones and missiles will not help the occupiers, says Zelensky. 45 Shahed drones were shot down, and I think that that's right. I think when you compare what's happened in Ukraine, it's very similar to what happened to London during the Blitz, and that is that it didn't cause the population to fold. It only stiffened their resolve, because they know that this is so wrong that they set their face even more against it. Okay, next. Now, this was encouraging. As part of the Army of Drones project, the government authorities of Ukraine have purchased 15,077 drones, 928 of which have already been handed over to the defenders of Ukraine. Now, these are smaller drones. These are more eyes and ears kinds of drones, not so much drones that'll be like kamikaze drones or things along those lines. But and I'm telling you, drones are the wave of the future in warfare. The U.S. government is paying very close attention to you, I assure you, because whatever the next fight is, the next war in the future, it'll be dominated by drones in the same way that tanks were introduced in World War I and then they dominated in World War II. Two of my sons are in Civil Air Patrol. They just finished a 3-month drone course for quadcopters, and they're about to start a drone course for fixed wing. I'm telling you, this is the wave of the future. Pay attention when you see things about drones. Okay, let's move on to the next major topic, and that is missile strikes and confusing numbers. So the general the Russian general just admitted that there were soldiers killed, but he didn't admit that there were 400 soldiers killed in the missile strike in the occupied territory. Ukraine claimed to have killed as many as 400 in this strike. This was a couple days ago at a military base in occupied Donetsk, although Russian officials countered with a figure of 63. 63, that's a long way. How do you get to 63? Well, here's a little bit more to the story. This is Radio Free Europe. The Russian Defense Ministry said on January 2nd that it was 63 servicemen were killed, but if you go down a little bit, you see something else. It also said that there were 300 troops wounded. So they're saying, yes, there were that number there, but I mean, now you're going to see how unbelievable it is that they were wounded in just a moment, so stay with me. Expressions in shock and anger by Russians online about the incident after the apparent failure of the Russian military to guard a occupied vocational school where purported recruits were gathered. So there was a large gathering. They did nothing. They just thought that they were safe behind enemy lines. One more thing, the unofficial operational reports channel said 500 troops were dead. Don't know that that's true. I think the Ukrainian figure is probably right. I think that the Russian figure is bizarre, but they're usually off by a factor of 7 or something along those lines when they give their counts of enemy wounded and that kind of thing. Here is another view of this, and I want to show you this video in The Guardian about what it actually looks like on the ground, the aftermath. So that is where the school was, the dormitory school, whatever it was, the facility. And after 6 missiles hit it, I'm not sure that many people are going to survive that. 300 wounded sounds very high to me. Okay, next topic. Let's talk about politics now. Zelensky gave a very stirring speech the other day on New Year's Day, and I went back and I went into Zelensky's speech and I covered Zelensky's speech and I covered Putin's speech, and then I went back afterwards just out of curiosity and I looked at it, and it turns out Zelensky used the words I, we, or our 97 times. Putin used those same words only 48 times. And I think that's one of the differences. Zelensky naturally thinks in terms of how do we get this done? How do we work together? And he has done a masterful job. So this is von der Leyen from the EU talking about how we stand there with you. The next is here's Borrell talking about how he stands with you. The West is pretty well good with exception of Hungary. But Zelensky is now moving a step forward. Zelensky held 18 conversations with African leaders, 9 of which were the first in history of bilateral relations. And you say, African leaders, why does that matter? It absolutely matters. Because there's a certain set that's with you, there's a certain set that's against you, and then there's a certain set that's kind of not really on either side. So who's with you? The West, led by the US and Europe, and then you have Japan and Australia and a few others, but generally that's with you. Then you have who's against you, and that's Russia and Belarus and Venezuela and Iran and Syria and North Korea. And then maybe China, but they don't want to get too close. Maybe Turkey, but they don't want to get too close. So you just got to understand, like, this is who the players. Everybody else is free game. So he's going after these people right now, trying to establish these bilateral relations. Ghana, Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique, Niger, Botswana. If he can rope any of these into his corner in the UN, that's going to be good stuff. Now, I have this sense, and I mean, they're doing this. They have a full court press on every side diplomatically. Entrance into the EU, trying to get into NATO, trying to expand who your allies are. And I just get this sense like the Ukrainians are playing chess while the Russians, at least outside of militarily, and probably even militarily, are playing checkers. So, okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. Now let's have some fun with Russian state media. Okay, and here's the first article, and what does Russia say about this? This is today's RT. More than 60 Russian troops have been killed by a Ukrainian missile strike targeted by 6 missiles from U.S.-supplied HIMARS missile rocket launchers. I'm not sure about HIMARS, but let's say. That's all they say. They don't say anything else useful or valuable about this. This is what's left. They even show the building. Like, how did 300 of these guys survive? It's a mystery. I guess just because they're mighty Russians. Now, this was interesting because of the contrast. So Zelensky's office admits serious losses in Bakhmut. Now, we're not talking about how many were killed just before in that strike, but they're talking about Andrei Mariocho, an officer of the People's Militia of the Luhansk People's Republic, said, according to our estimates, about 500 fighters of the armed forces of Ukraine get killed every day in Bakhmut. Okay, let's say that that's the case. I'm not saying it is, but let's say. But there's nothing left in the article about how many Russians are killed. And Russians are being fed into slaughter against a defensive position. It's got to be a large multiple. So if that is the case, and I hope that it's not the case, but if that is, there's a multiple of Russians being killed. Okay, now this article was a little interesting because of how petty it was. President Putin is not going to send his season's greetings to the leaders of Russia-unfriendly countries. And who are those Russian-unfriendly countries? Well, the friendly countries are essentially, here's the list of who he sent season's greetings to, and they're generally formerly Russian Soviet kind of sphere states, and people that are on the terrorist list. And then there's a couple of outliers like China and Turkey. So here we go. President of Belarus, President of Bolivia. That's one that they're trying to rope into the fold. Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, who is a tight with Putin guy. Venezuelan president, who voted with the UN with Russia. Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. Okay. President Xi of China. Cuban president, Nicaraguan president, Syrian president, and Turkish president Erdogan, who's kind of like for Ukraine when it works for him and for Russia when it works for him, because he's all about him. And as long as you know that, that's fine. The rest are all these former Soviet satellite states. Now, what was fascinating, Putin did not congratulate the United States on Independence Day, and Putin did not congratulate the Prime Minister of the UK after Liz Truss's resignation. So this article just shows you that Putin is, I guess, petty, but go Putin, I guess, is what they're saying in Pravda. Okay, one more. Um, there's almost nothing of value here, but Putin is ringing the death knell for NATO, and that's a perennial thing where they keep saying how they're going to destroy NATO. But here, I want to show you just one line. Western experts have largely forgotten that territorial conquest is not Russia's central agenda. NATO expansion is, although, of course, Ukraine is vital to Russian interests. Okay, territorial conquest is not part of their agenda. That's how they've expanded. Why do you think they're in 11 time zones? That it's all territorial conquest. It's just of your neighbors. Okay. So last thing, and I'm going to end on a happier note, and that is this. I saw this really interesting article. It was about why I'm learning Ukrainian. This was in The Guardian. Because the language is political for the country I've grown to love. I think a lot of us feel that way. We've grown to love Ukraine over the last 8 months, 9 months, 10 months of trauma. Why is it political? Well, there has been, when the Russians came in, they de-Ukrainianized, I guess I could say. They took out the language. And then when Ukraine got its independence, they began going, hey, look, let's speak Ukrainian. And this has become a thing. But I want to show you just one little line here. Duolingo Ukrainian may be something of a minority sport, but last month the app's data crunchers reported that it was Duolingo's fastest growing language of the year in the UK, with users rising by 1,254%, and that it had grown by a remarkable 2,229%. Nothing grows that fast naturally. As a management professor, I'm telling you, so I just thought that was fascinating. If you want to learn a little bit more about Ukrainian language, Anna from Ukraine, go to Anna from Ukraine on YouTube. She does a Ukrainian word of the day. She also does a daily vlog about what's going on in her country, but the Ukrainian word of the day will help you. I would highly recommend that you check it out. Okay, so that's all that I have for you. Thank you for your time. If you got value out of this, please give me a like, subscribe. You can buy me a coffee. I will be back tomorrow. I hope you will be. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.